Anita Felicelli is the author of the novel Chimerica from Why There Are Words Press, and I see Peg down below, so that's wonderful. Also the author of a short story collection from Stillhouse Press, Songs for a Lost Continent, that won a major award. Anita's stories, I assume maybe some of them went into the short story collection, have been published widely in a number of journals. As if that weren't enough, she's also an award-winning journalist with an impressive slate of reviews of many, many books. And in fact, it's a review of her book that led us to look into inviting Anita to be on Stories on Stage. She, in a previous life, was an attorney, was 8 years practicing. Is that right, Anita?
That's correct.
Yeah. And then made the, for what for some might be a fairly significant shift into writing full time. Say you're a professional writer, right? It's how you make your living. So we thought that would be of interest too. I mean, many people write, few can claim to call it a profession. I certainly fall into that. And as she mentioned, she lives in the Bay Area. I could go into more accolades, but probably won't. She has a really nice website that's easy to navigate and doesn't have a whole lot of stuff to confuse you. So if you want to learn more, just go there and check it out. So Sue Staats and I, the other day, were, I'm not joking around isn't the right word. We were trying to figure out how to synopsize or summarize Chimerica. It is difficult because the book is many, many things and touches on many types of storytelling while remaining very consistent in terms of voice. So it's not as though it, changes what it is when you feel touches of noir or suspense or courtroom drama or surrealism or anything else. So even though the synopsis on the website is excellent, just as a challenge this morning, I thought I'd try my hand at a real short synopsis. So we'll see how I do, and you can correct me if I go astray. So, two desperate, alienated characters, a Tamil American trial lawyer, Maya, and a lemur on the run after liberating himself from a mural in Oakland, find one another in a way that feels fated and utterly natural. She defends the lemur in his bid for selfhood against claims that he is artistic property and has no personal rights. Sheltering in Maya's home, the lemur gorges on junk food and the internet and becomes a lightning rod for social media. Maya, on the other hand, while researching, building, and fighting for the lemur's rights, has to fight her own internal and external battles to be recognized for her skill, talent, and individuality in the, quote, civilized, white, male-dominated field of law, and, much like the lemur, to find her home. So that's how I summarized it. Would you add anything to that, Anita or Sue?
No, I think that's an amazing summary. Wow. I love your summary.
That was fun. The other thing I wanted to do, because I mentioned that Shelley actually brought the book to my attention after reading a review in, the LA Times Review of Books that fascinated us both. And we were looking for an author to pair with Todd Goldberg, who's kind of a suspense, crime, literary mashup author himself. And so the notion of the mashup really appealed to us. I just want to read a few snippets, not the whole reviews, but they give you an idea of this complexity that I'm talking about that is actually very hard to describe. You really have to read it. So one reviewer calls it a coolly surrealist legal thriller. Another says, the best novel I can remember reading about the legal system and the way it intersects with women's ambition and the so-called American dream. Another says, Anita blends the matter-of-fact with the mysterious in this utterly unique and compellingly readable debut. I certainly felt that way. Kelly Luce says, it's a novel about trial lawyers, talking lemurs, and public art, a book you never knew you needed. I agree with that too. And then the Looks like I left a page at home. Anyway, wouldn't you know it? I left the LA Review of Books that page at home. Idiot. Anywho.
Lucky for you.
You have it. For me, that entire review is amazing.
Right, it is.
You want to read that one, Sue?
I just have the snippet I used when I interviewed Anita online. It says, Anita Felicelli's propulsive debut novel, Chimerica, almost dares you to try to categorize it. A legal thriller that builds to a climactic courtroom showdown. A heist drama that pits two scrappy underdogs against a preening art world celebrity. I love these adjectives. A magic realist yarn with an eye-popping premise in an everyday milieu. True to the hybrid mythological creature referenced by its title, Chimerica is unapologetically and effortlessly all these things. But perhaps most of all, it's a work of cannily revisionist California noir, a genre that, in Felicelli's deft hands, somehow encompasses all the others, reflecting the world we think we know back to us in its strangeness.
Thank you, Sue. Yeah,
what an amazing
that was the
review.
one. And so reading about all this variety in the book, and I think buzzwords, particularly for me and maybe for Shelley, were noir. I love noir. And when I picked up the book, frankly, I'm a skeptical reader. I thought Talking Lemurs, that this was not going to feel real, that I wouldn't be sucked into the character. And I think I told this to someone I was describing the book the other day. I won't tell you what happens to the lemur because that would be a spoiler. But it made me cry. And to be brought to tears by a talking, Cheeto-popping, Coke-swilling lemur, who spends a lot of time in chat rooms, that's quite an accomplishment. In other words, I was sucked in, and you will be too. So, beginning with the questions, just to get things going, Madagascar. It's an amazing place, right? I mean, it's probably like no place else in the world in the unique, isolated way that things develop there, including lemurs. Using it in the book, I'm sure you have lots of reasons for that. It then also contrasts so much with the diaspora everywhere else. Everything else is being mixed up, including the lemur and the protagonist, and spreading out in the world and yet still feeling isolated, right? So the dispersion doesn't end the isolation. So I found those two tensions really interesting and wanted to ask you, your feelings about why Madagascar, and just on a personal note, whether you've been there.
Oh, okay. I have been there. I was there in, I think, 2007 or 2008. I was going to my cousin's wedding, which was in South Africa. And we decided to add Madagascar to that trip. I had been interested in Madagascar before that. I think because I'm interested in that idea of an island where the species develop so that they're not like any species found elsewhere in the world. Because in isolation, there's a different like predator-prey relationship, and there's sort of a uniqueness to the animals in Madagascar and in the Galapagos, and that's just an interest of mine. So I also wrote another book about Madagascar first, which didn't work, and then I wrote this one. And while I was sort of burying my negative feelings about the first one that didn't work, I stumbled across information that Madagascar was part of this mythological, this myth from Tamil Nadu, which is where I was born, where my parents are from. That there was a myth of a lost continent that was submerged into the ocean, and that Madagascar was part of it. And there's this whole like mythological history, and I discovered that before writing Chimerica a little bit, and then I just kept discovering more and more. But because of that, I felt a stronger connection because it had to do with this myth from that I had heard of the lost continent before, but I hadn't heard that Madagascar was like attached to it. And so that became sort of a central idea in developing
that's fascinating.
This particular book.
So like it's maybe the tip of what's left and the rest is under the
Well,
ocean.
it's an interesting thing. It's actually that in this lost continent idea, California is supposed to be part of it too. And I thought, how odd that it should be California, Madagascar. I mean, it's a myth, right? So it's not necessarily like sensical, but it was just interesting to have these connections, between those, and that sort of inspired me to.
Yeah, yeah.
to
And what really intrigued me was the whole notion of the lemur taken out of his very unique natural environment, which was the only place on the earth that could create that creature, and thrown into the Bay Area, and how poorly he does. But then he's really a character without a home.
Right.
He was made from paint.
Right.
Even though he feels his, what do you call it, like genetic roots in Madagascar, right, he can't actually make it happen. Oh, I'm giving too much away.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. He's a construction, but interestingly, even in spite of being a construction, he still feels kind of a longing for Madagascar.
Yeah. No, he's a very what's the word for a character? He's very empathetic in a strange way. He kind of steals the show, like they say about movies with kids and dogs. The lemur steals the show. For me. Yeah. Great. Thank you, Anita. Sue, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I wanted to let me follow up with that. I felt very much the same about the lemur. How in a way the lemur for me became sort of the grounding creature in this novel. In many ways, because Maya, the protagonist, who's the attorney, who's ambitious, and what she's trying to prove herself and trying to get a job back and trying to do all these things. She thinks she knows what she wants, but in a way, the lemur knows what he wants. He just wants to go home. And I'm wondering, he sort of becomes the truth that's in there and that they're all looking for. And he becomes kind of the emotional heart of the novel. And if I'm giving too much away, that's just tough. Just read the book because there's so much more. Don't worry about it. But I just wondered if the way that a lemur becomes that emotional heart of the novel, was that always your intent?
Yes. The novel was originally, I mean, the novel was always about Maya and the lemur, and Maya was a character from a novel I'd written 10 years before I wrote this novel. And she had just stayed with me for so long. And then I knew that character was going to become an attorney. So I ended up making this novel about her, but the lemur was the center of the novel first. Like, it was supposed to be an allegory about art and the power of art, and the lemur represented that. And then it kind of took on a life of its own, and Maya gained more center. She got center stage, I guess, because she was the narrating voice.
Okay. Because she ends up learning from him rather than the other way around. I think he is the influence on her, even though he is sort of, as you present him, eating Cheetos and surfing the internet. He's sort of a teenage boy.
Yeah, that's probably true. He's modeled on someone who was a teenage boy, so that's really where that comes from.
Yeah, and to continue that, he's gets smelly and too hairy, and so a teenage boy basically. I see that we have a question from Shelley asking about your short story collection and wondering why you think you're especially drawn to mythology. Why do you think it means so much to so many of us? These are like root stories, right? They bring things out in us. So you want to speak to that?
Sure. I was always drawn to mythology and fairy tales. That's probably one of my first loves. I remember that I had a book, an illustrated book of Greek myths, and I read it over and over and over again as a small child. And I think, as I got older, I started to be more curious about, I also read a lot of Hindu comic books. There were the Amar Chitra Katha books, and I grew up reading those as well. And so in college, one of my majors was a self-design major related to anthropology, and in that. Within anthropology, I did a lot of research on myths and legends, and urban
Wow.
legends and stuff like that. And I just like the idea of a collective story. I think a collective story says so much about a culture and a particular society. But then it's interesting because those stories travel. So there's also obviously some very basic human element to those stories that allows them to travel. And then as they go to a new place, they take on some more components of that place. And so you have like, Sleeping Beauty from France, but you also have, Sleeping Beauty from Russia. And then you have, your Americanized Disneyfied version of, Sleeping Beauty. But and then there's ones that are found in India that are also found in Russia or in Western Europe somewhere, or Africa, or whatever. But they all vary slightly to take on the texture of the culture into which they're being told. And there's something about that travel and capacity of a story and how it assimilates into a new environment that I think is really interesting.
That's fascinating. Thanks for the question, Shelley. You mentioned comic books, Indian comic books, and we have our teenage boy Lemur. Immediately popped into my head the vision of a graphic novel with the lemur. So if you would put that on your list of things to write.
Oh my God, that would be amazing if someone else would take that on. That'd be awesome. Or like an animated, I totally see this as like an animated kind of a thing.
Yeah. It just popped into my head. I could see it. Yeah. Kind of shifting gears a little bit. I know from knowing many of you on the screen that many of us are writers and are interested in just the craft and the life of being a writer and the stresses and strains. I wanted to ask you about, as a full-time writer and a full-time mother, I assume you have fairly small kids, right?
Yeah. 4 and 7. So
4 and 7. Wow. Yeah, that's a lot. And I assume now with the quarantine, you're probably involved with homeschooling for them, which adds another layer. I wondered about your writing practice, how you go about it. Also, whether, the quarantine has thrown any monkey wrenches into it. Are you one of those people with gets up every day and has tons of inspiration, or do you have lulls? And clearly you balance your work between probably work that pays immediately, journalism, and work that's longer term, like a novel or a short story collection. So anything you want to share about your day-to-day life as a writer and your challenges?
Sure. I had fewer challenges prior to this quarantine, I will say. So my schedule then was that I wrote every day. And I also wrote for my job, which is like ghostwriting work every day. So I was writing like literally almost all the time, except for the time that I was spending with my kids. But they were in preschool and early elementary school. So I could fit everything in. With quarantine, it's become more like, I get a chance to write my own fiction probably only 3 days a week. But I do it after the kids are in bed, or I wake up really early if I want to work that day and work before they wake up. And then my spouse is also a writer, so we trade off. So he does his work. He tries to cram his job into the 3.5 days, and I cram my job into the other 3.5 days. And so we somehow juggle everything that way. But yeah, it is definitely harder to fit in writing during this period. So
yeah, have you found that it's affected like energy or inspiration to write, to have all this going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely I've been, struggling a little with anxiety and depression during this period where I normally know how to balance it. Like there's not really things you can't like jolt yourself out really in these conditions. So definitely that affects the writing. But I had a good writing morning the other day, and I think you just have to keep on appearing and struggling through that. So
Yeah. So there's hope. In other words, there's hope.
Yeah. I mean, there's hope even with all the things happening in the news. I limit my news intake a little bit in order for the purposes of keep staying out of the range of being too overwhelmed to write. So
yeah, I don't know about others in the audience, but I'm struggling to find what's the word, relevance. I feel, start writing something and feel like, why bother? Who cares about this? People are dying, et cetera, et cetera. So, but.
Yeah, I definitely feel that too.
Need to push through that. It looks like we have another great question following up from Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. Following up on mythology and the fantastic. The book feels so extraordinarily real, which it does. And I'm interested in how you developed Maya's opening predicament and what she wrestles with in the world and her family and job, marriage too, right? If you could talk about this a little bit and how you mix the realistic and fantastic, because you do it in a way that it's not jarring. It's like, well, of course this is happening. So yeah, the great question, Sarah. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. How did I develop Maya's opening predicament? I'm assuming that means her opening predicament is that she's losing her job, and she's in an affair with someone at her work who also loses his job. And so I think that's the opening predicament that's referred to in the question. But I read a book a long time ago called Becoming Gentlemen by Lonnie Guinier, I think she's a Harvard professor. And I read this the summer before I went to law school, because when you go to law school, they give you this list of books that you can read, just kind of like to prepare your brain for studying law. And one of them was Becoming Gentlemen on the UC Berkeley list. And for that reason, I read it, and I didn't, somebody had warned me about going to law school. Like I had worked at the public defender's office in the foster care section in the dependency unit. And someone I worked with there was like, it's not like what you think it's going to be like. But I was like, like, what do you know about me? Like, we just met, this is just like a job, and like, you don't know me or anything. So, but when I read this book, I was like, oh, there's some undercurrent that I don't know about as like a 21-year-old. And I had my eye on that undercurrent. What the book is about, how women end up having to act more and more in stereotypically masculine ways when they go out to practice, and especially for women of color, that can be an alienating experience. And when I actually practiced law, then I understood the book. I didn't actually, you can read something like, and it's just like these abstract words on a page, and you can kind of internalize that and talk a talk, but it doesn't actually mean anything until you actually viscerally experience it for yourself. And I found the practice of law to be extremely alienating. And not because I was bad at it, I was actually good at it. And I still found it to be alienating to act in that way. Like I felt constantly divorced from myself. So I think when I was developing the lemur allegory, and I needed a predicament that would take Maya out of that firm life, because if she stayed at the firm, she would have to just continue on the path that she was on, and there could be no real change. But once she was fired from that job, then there could be some real growth and some real character development. And so for that reason, I developed that predicament as of her being fired and desperately wanting to get that job back, even though it had been so alienating, she lost her family over it. And so the fusion of the realistic and the fantastic, the premise was there first, right? The premise of the lemur escaping from the mural was first, and Maya, was a great catalyst with that. So that's how that fused together. But I took for granted that the lemur could talk and all of that stuff. I didn't, that's just how I think. That's just, most of my stories actually do have that potential for that. And then some stories I just nix that out of it, because there's a smaller market for that kind of fusion of fantastic and realist. But that is like my natural mode. So it made it easier to write this novel. And this was maybe my fourth novel. So I was going to go with it with the kind of mode that felt natural to me. I think if I write more novels, eventually I'll feel comfortable taking more risks, but that was like the least risky thing I could do, because it came without me having to struggle against it.
It's really interesting. Thank you. Yeah, it's the blending of the realistic and the fantastic. The way you worded that, Sarah, that's really a lot of what drew me in. no one ever says, oh my God, it's a talking lemur, or oh my God, what can he do? He's not treated like a party trick, or, you know, someone to be captured and put in a special zoo. It just is. There's one talking lemur in the world, and here he is. And I love that. And also that he is so fully developed. And I think that's part of why you don't question it, because he's a real character. And compelling, and he has hopes and dreams and all those things, of course a talking lemur would have. Anyway, well done. Yeah. Did you want to ask a question, Sue? I see
I was just wanted to, I feel as if I wanted to jump in. I loved, one of the things I loved about the lemur was how he didn't just appear and talk to the character, to Maya. He also talked to all the other characters in the book. You know, he testified, he did all these things, and nobody said, "Oh my God, it's a lemur." They just dealt with him, and so that was just, I love that part of it, because I definitely would have said, "Oh my God, it's a lemur." But sort of switching here, your protagonist Maya is a woman of color and in a profession that you were. And I'm wondering how much of her experience as in the novel is reflective of your experience as a practicing attorney.
I think it is fairly reflective of my experience as a practicing attorney. I would say that actually being a practicing attorney was more difficult than the novel makes it appear, I think, especially as a woman of color. I mean, I could have put in a lot more stuff around that particular drama, but that wasn't, you know, for me, the central interest. Mm-hmm. And I also didn't want to just have like piles and piles of flashbacks, you know, because it ruins the momentum of the novel. So it's reflective to some extent, but I think, like, you know, I was a sensitive person practicing law. So I noticed like everything as they were occurring. There was no epiphany for me to have when I left, in terms of what the practice was like. Whereas for her, you know, she keeps performing throughout without really going through her feelings about every single thing that happens to her. And so she's able to have this revelation afterwards, but she's also probably, you know, smoothing over or interpreting differently experiences as they occur to her. And so that's like a significant difference in our experience of it, right? Because like I was actually processing things as they occurred. So this novel would never really be, this is not an experience I would have, you know.
She's clearly not you, but because of that, because she keeps just saying, "Oh God, I want my job back," and
yeah, she's very obsessed with this job.
The reader, me, is saying, "No, you don't. That job is awful for you.
Yeah." Right, you're sympathizing with the father and the other and her husband who are saying, no, leave this job.
I am, definitely, because it's clearly so wrong for her, which is one of the brilliant things about the book, is that the reader is fully, it's one of the things that makes the reader really participate, is how wrong the protagonist actually is about herself,
right,
in terms of what she wants. Just to follow up on that, when the actress Kat Miller read the section of the book that we had for the virtual event, which you can find on, where is it, Shelley?
It's on the website and on YouTube.
Right. Okay.
You can find a link on our website.
It is completely stunning. The part that was read was a part where Maya talks about an experience she had as a young woman of being not seen, and the actress found it incredibly difficult to get through it, and it was an amazing emotional live moment. And I am wondering if you could address how that was for you, Anita, to hear your words just affect a professional actress in that way.
Yeah, no, it was kind of stunning. I mean, I was so I was both moved and kind of amazed, like, because they didn't seem like my words anymore. Like, because when she's reading them, they're like no longer mine. I mean, really, the book is who is the reader's, not really mine anymore. But I just thought that was amazing that she connected so much to the material, and then, you know, had an emotional response to it. And I felt very fortunate I felt very fortunate that she connected like that with it.
Yeah, it was a unique experience. And if any of you haven't watched the video of the reading of an excerpt of Chimerica, do so. I mean, as um, Anita and Sue have said, this professional actress, yeah, she just pretty much lost it by getting so deeply into the story and relating to it so personally. I wanted to back up. It looks like we have a couple of questions. One from Amanda. On the path to publication, I'm wondering about your collection and Chimerica. Were you asked to make edits or changes that you found useful, challenging? What did editing toward publication contribute to your process? So yeah, after you had the acceptance from your publisher, kind of the process from there.
We didn't do some significant edits on Chimerica, but interestingly, an earlier draft did have certain people noticing that the lemur talked. Like it kind of broke the fourth wall a little bit, and that was because my spouse, who was my first reader on this, had really liked that effect, but then when Peg and I were working on it and we thought about it some more, I decided that I wanted to go with more like a Murakami approach. Because, if you read Murakami, a bunch of crazy stuff happens and it's just, people are just lackadaisical about it. And I like that quality. I think that quality is really what makes me want to keep reading Murakami. I think once you start being like, oh, what is this? Then you have to get into it on a different level, and then you have to provide explanations. And it's, it reminds me of those Piers Anthony books. They're always a little too, for me, commercial fantasy is always a little too neat. And I want that feeling of kind of an unsettling feeling. So when Peg and I were working on the editing, that was definitely, at the forefront of my mind. With the editing for the collection, that was with a Stillhouse editor, and he was really great. There were things in that collection that might be culturally difficult to understand, but I actually was so lucky in that case because he had an Indian friend. His best friend was Indian in childhood, so he kind of knew things that I was talking about and was able to help me figure out what things needed to be explained or not in a culturally, in a sensitive way, and so that was also a great editing experience. The editing experience is really good because it's about how is someone reading you, as opposed when you're doing writing groups and other editing before acceptance. Those are more substantial, and there's room to really shake things up. But when you're getting to that process after acceptance, then it's more about shaping the experience for the reader to make it the best experience for the reader. And that's, so it's a really useful aspect of publishing.
Yeah. Yeah. I love working with an editor. It doesn't happen enough.
Yeah.
Where a place will just accept a story and it's no, tell me what's wrong. I want to fix it. And they just go with it. That's kind of, yeah. Thank you, Amanda. Great question. And it looks like Shelley is asking about Maya, a difficult woman, as we've kind of described a little bit, who doesn't always do what she ought to do. And whether you find inspiration in characters like this, does she remind you of anyone from other things you've read or met? Or, yeah, a little bit about her.
Sure. I was an English literature major in college, and one of my favorite characters was Becky Sharp from Vanity Fair. So I have always had a thing for ambitious, difficult women as a character, building characters that are like that. That's my favorite type of character. I love that book. And there are other difficult women characters in literature, but I think that's the one who most relates to Maya, or that is maybe the most inspiration for Maya, because she's a striver and Maya's kind of a striver. And
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, thanks. Well, okay, kind of shifting gears again. I guess I'm good for that. I wondered about the role of writing community for you. So you shifted careers from the law, and I don't know whether there was a period when you were trying to do both, writing stories and practicing, and it happened more naturally, or if it was sudden. Regardless, I know for myself, leaving one career and then writing. It's a whole different world, different people, different groups that you work with. So I just wondered how important community has been to you, and whether it was hard to find, what kind of groups you work with now. Do you have critique groups, or, anything you want to share about community, literary community for you?
Sure. I think, I started writing when I was 5 years old, and I always knew that that was going to be what I was going to be doing. So I had a critique group during college. I had critique group actually all the way, probably about halfway through law school. Then I lost my critique group, and also the law school stuff took over. And I was basically writing in isolation for the next 10 years. And I didn't have a critique group at that point. My spouse isn't really into critiquing people's work in general. And so he did read a few things here and there, but he didn't really critique it per se. And then I only really started thinking about community as an important aspect of writing probably in the last 6 years, six years or so. And then I found it to be an extremely valuable thing. I joined the Ruby, which is a co-working space in the city that I love. And it's like a women identifying collective, essentially, of different kinds of artists and writers. And so I joined them, and that's, they have these different events, and I love going to those. And then I have a writing group. I had a writing group for the last 3 years, but I actually switched writing groups last year to a different one. And yeah, we currently meet once a week on Zoom. So that's great. And then there's just people you meet on Twitter, or, on Facebook, or at an event or something like that you end up keeping in touch with. And so, or like the Tin House workshop, I met some great writers there. And so over time you build community, but for about 10 years, I was writing completely by myself. And I don't, it's fortifying, but I wouldn't say it's essential to the writing process per se.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, looking at the screen, there are at least 4 or 5 people here that I know from different writing groups and venues that I've been part of. So, and Shelley and I met at the Napa Valley Writers Conference 5 years ago. So shifting careers, I was in environmental protection, shifting careers, I kind of lost a whole cast of friends that were professional friends. So I feel like I have a new cast of writing friends. Yeah. So
yeah, no, that's totally true. I actually didn't make very many lawyer friends. I had some lawyer friends from job to job, but I didn't like the law. So I wasn't aching to spend my free time I wanted to be writing in my free time. I didn't want to be, and that was a clear indicator that was not the life for me, because I love being around other writers and I love my community now. So
I think I'm more naive. I thought I had made friends.
Oh,
they're not there anymore.
Oh.
Oh, well. Okay. So you mentioned that for you, writing in that magical, surreal way where it's just a fact of life is natural to you, that feels right. I wondered about, for you, where ideas come from, or do you have a store of things that you've wanted to write, meant to write, and now you're getting at them, or do new ideas pop in all the time? Because you have some pretty fantastic ideas, fantastic and fantastical.
New ideas come to me all the time. I have a running list that I keep in my Gmail, and in a drafts document. And then if I'm actually running out of anything, then I can go look at it. But I rarely ever have to look at it, because my brain is worrying. I have that monkey mind or whatever, that problem in Buddhism. That's definitely the kind of brain I have, and writing allows me to exercise some of those things, because there's just too much in there, I think, and too much competing and conflicting in there. So.
Yeah, I'd love to see your idea notebook. Probably pretty funny. Did you want to follow up, Sue?
Dorothy, no, actually, I wanted to go back to something Amanda said about publication. I was curious, Anita, how you came together with WTAW Press, because it's a small and relatively new press, and I know Sarah, your book was published by them. So I'm just wondering how you came to them, and tell me about your journey to them.
Oh, I wrote Chimerica between 2010 and 2015, and I queried agents, and I sent it to a few small presses, and then I put it aside because I was working on my short story collection, and that took the forefront of my mind, and I didn't have time to be doing all the administrative stuff that submitting. And I'd kind of, I was just like, this is also kind of a weird book. I wasn't sure it was going to find. The more I learned about publishing and how publishing works, the less certain I was that it was going to find the right place. And it almost found various agents, and everything fell through. So I found Peg after my short story collection through a, we both belonged to a group of Bay Area women writers. And I had asked for a conversation partner for an event for a short story collection. And so that's how I came to know about Why There Are Words Press. Mm-hmm. And she responded to my conversation.
Yeah. Was there any other publisher under consideration for that book, or did WTAW was where you went and never considered anywhere else?
I didn't really consider anywhere else. I didn't think that hard about it because I had already moved on to the short story collection, and I'm working on another novel that I was already working on at that time too. Oh, okay. I tend to be I have a lot of projects going all the time, and that's more my interest than publishing per se. So I didn't really give it that much thought.
Yeah.
As a writer who finished a book a while ago, is it hard to kind of go back and talk about Chimerica, which has just come out, but you wrote it a long time ago?
Yeah, I was a completely different person at the time it came out. I had just left legal practice when I started writing it. And when I paused on working on it, I had been a mom for a few years already by that point. And yeah, it's definitely challenging to then kind of return to that headspace of when I just kind of called it quits on a legal career. So yeah, it brings me back to that time. It's interesting, right? For nostalgia purposes, it's oh, that's who I was then. That's what I thought. And, it's not I disagree with that because it's all a first person narrator's point of view, but looking at the decisions I made and stuff now is a little different than they would have been had the book come out in, 2015 or something.
Yeah. Learning about the timing just now makes sense. Maya's sense of frustration and fear and anxiety and anger is so palpable. It was fairly fresh for you having just left, your feelings about the law and knowledge too.
Right. And the knowledge is strong in there, whereas if I were writing it now, I probably wouldn't include so much knowledge about, I do some ghostwriting for lawyers, so the knowledge is still there, but that's not as in the forefront of my brain,
Yeah, that's something that was picked up in the reviews, but I don't think, we've really mentioned here is the courtroom scenes are really tight and well done. They're riveting. How was that to do? Maybe we'll have time for another question or two and then we'll wrap up. But so I don't know if you want to talk about the courtroom drama. It really is a courtroom drama.
It is kind of a courtroom drama. Yeah, no, I'm really excited. I think everything that happens in the legal world is super fascinating. I actually still think that. Even now, I watch Procedure. I watch The Good Fight regularly. I love watching that show. I think it's the best show ever. I love The Good Wife. I grew up on Ally McBeal and all that stuff when I was younger. And The Practice, and I just watch so many procedurals. I'm very fascinated by procedurals in general. I think why people make the strategic decisions they make is still infinitely fascinating to me. So writing them was super fun because it was kind of nonsense courtroom scenes, but still I still used rules of procedure and stuff. So it was really fun for me to just turn this thing, this very intense experience into something absurd and funny, or to me funny.
Yeah. Well, it's nonsense, not nonsense, because she's fighting for his right to be real.
Right. Right. There are high stakes in it within this course of the novel, but it was fun to just blend the absurd with the realistic.
Right. If you buy into the premise, then it's incredibly gripping because the stakes are very high, and what he would lose if she lost his case for him.
Right. And there's a certain logic to legal proceedings that you still have to build into that, or at least I felt had to be built into that.
Yeah.
So.
No, so well done. So we've gone almost an hour. Does anyone have a burning question they want to ask Anita? Yeah. You want to unmute? It's Lillian, right?
Yes, thank you. Hi, Anita. Sorry I couldn't come here earlier, but I just wanted to let you, and I'm so glad that I caught this wonderful discussion. I just want to let you know that the way that you capture, Anita and I have mentioned this before, we both graduated from the same law school. And I just want to say, Anita, that the way that you capture the way that litigators think, women of color who are in the law, what their internal process is so well done. It's captured really, really well in your novel. I just felt that you were just spot on. And I wanted to ask you what you felt was, because it is gripping, the law, the courtroom scenes. What is it that according to you is so captivating for readers about the law, lawyers? I'm with you that, oh my God, there's so much that's wrong with the law. And I think the fact that the number of friends that you have in the law is probably a really good reflection on you and your mental sanity. But it's something that really captivates and continues to captivate readers. What is it, according to you, that's so appealing and that's so fascinating
About the law?
The law and literature.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thank you. Those are all such nice things to hear. I think for me, what's captivating is that that there's so much violence in the world, and the legal system is supposed to capture all of that and convert it into language and somehow make it all sort of acceptable and calm so that, nobody gets killed. Prior to legal system, someone would steal something from a neighbor and they'd go and kill them, bash them over the head with a rock or something. And I think, what fascinates me about the legal system is that it's all just converting those violent feelings into something much more manageable, which is language. And the legal system to me is all just the power of language and stories. I think it's the profession. I mean, what writers do is super important, but the profession of litigators is their business is stories. Like what story, and it's putting it into this formal setting, and it's one story competing against another story. And then a group of people from that same social world come and hear those two stories and decide which one to believe, and how that all plays out to me is just like ultimately the most fascinating experience. It's like the distillation of all the world's problems in this, in this setting with rules, and it's about persuasion and who is convinced by what. I mean, I think that's like a central thing in the novel is how do the stories that we tell ourselves affect how we perceive other people's stories? I think, that's something I was working on with Love Songs. It's what I'm working on with my current book. All my books are kind of meta because I'm also a critic, and just the power of stories is to me the central interest in the law, and it's also my central interest as a writer.
Cool, thank you.
Anita, I am so interested to hear you say that, because it answers a question that I have asked a number of the writers who came to Stories on Stage. I think last year, the 2019 season, of the more than 10, maybe 20 writers we had featured, fully a third of them were or had been attorneys. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like a theme in the season. And I kept asking them why. And now you're telling me it's because the law is stories.
It
And,
is. Yes.
and there it is right in front of your face. And I'd never heard it expressed that way. So thank you.
Right. Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, a lot of lawyers are, channel their storytelling ability into litigation. So.
Yeah, and many are life or death stories and high stakes stories. So yeah, that's fascinating. Anyone have a last burning question? I don't want to cut anybody off that would like to ask something. Raise your hand. Okay. I'll just make a few announcements then. First of all, thank you so much, Anita. This was wonderful. Thank you everyone who joined in. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Sue, Shelley. Any of you, obviously, go buy the book from your small bookstore locally here in Sacramento. We're always recommending Capital Books on K, but you're not all from Sacramento. I'm sure you have your favorite small bookstore. And of course, Anita's book is also available from Small Press Distribution, which also needs our support as a small business during these times. Thank you all so much for participating in our first book chat.
Thank you for having
This was
me.
really great. I appreciate it.
I loved it.
Thank you.